Owning a real estate portfolio is one of the most rewarding things, in my view, that we can have later on in our lives. However, buying it, managing it, maintaining it is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. Today's episode, we unpack the psychological bullets that real estate and owning a real estate portfolio is going to throw at you. How you respond and react to those bullets is super, super important. And we're going to unpack what the challenges are, how to respond to them, and why we do it in the first place. This is a really, really great episode. If you own between 1 and 10 homes, you're going to find a lot of familiarity with today's concepts. And I think you're going to take away a lot of tools and tips to help you grow your real estate portfolio and your life-altering burn your boats wealth. Today's episode is an episode for you. Enjoy it. I think this is a super important topic. Let's get right into this show.
It's the Burn Your Boats podcast, surviving the psychological bullets of real estate. And now your hosts, Clark Lunt and David Shaw.
All right, Clark, we're going to do maybe the most important topic that I can think of being a real estate investor. And that is the topic about how to survive what I term the psychological bullets of being a real estate investor. Clark, right off the bat, what do you think about this topic? What do you think about this subject?
It's interesting because I think a lot of times when people get into real estate investing, they're like, well, what color should I paint the front door? What type of granite should I use? How do I find tenants, right? And when you really step back and think about it, those things are all so minor in importance to like the actual headspace, the way that you view things from a much bigger level. Kind of sitting in that 10,000 foot view. And that's why it's really, really important for us to talk about this, because a lot of times you're never even going to get a chance to paint the front door whatever color you want, or get a chance if you don't even get started, because you have all these psychological bullets being shot at you. And so let's kind of dive into that, David. And I think we should have a few funny stories to share along the way. We've had I've got actually bullet holes from my psychological bullets on my shirt. If you're listening to this, you can't see them, but they're there, and they're still being shot at me all the time, right? But how do we overcome and kind of thwart off those psychological bullets? So let's kind of dive right into this, David, and where do you want to take this?
Well, we're going to talk about what are the psychological bullets of building, buying, scaling real estate, why it's such an important topic, right? And today's podcast might have a little bit more flowery language than normal, because we're going to talk invariably about how to survive all those kicks in the face, because all you get from owning a real estate portfolio from day one is challenges and kicks in the face. And how we survive those is very much the concept of understanding them, the concept of surviving them will determine not only your outcome, but most likely the outcome for your children and your children's children. Because remember, real estate here, you are most likely the first person in your family to fundamentally change the outcome of intergenerational wealth in your family. I'm not saying everybody, but most people listening to this podcast, you are the change. You are the difference. You are the person who thinks differently. Because remember, most people, play it safe. They don't want to be hassled. They think everything's risky. They are overtly conservative, and they like to play by the rules. But real estate investors, by their very nature, are the change. We are the change makers. And so let me explain what we're talking about. So I've had at least 1,000 conversations with investors that are struggling with a whole host of different psychological challenges, barriers, if you will. They are anything from the concept of investing in the first place, from actually deciding to buy, applying for a mortgage, getting a mortgage, going all through the hassle of applying for a mortgage, getting a mortgage, choosing a house, trusting people, buying the house, you know, getting insurance on a house, paying taxes on a house, getting a property manager, all of this stuff at every single step of what I've just said is littered with little grenades that are going to kick you right in the nuts every single time. And if you have an anger or a cortisol reaction every single time something negative happens, you're going to find it very, very difficult to actually get to your goals. And so let me give you an example. First and foremost, please understand how you approach real estate and how you understand and how you personally react. This is a psychological reaction that you're having to getting essentially bad news or news that you don't like. Things aren't going your way. And so if you go into real estate with the expectation that this is just easy, I'm going to buy it, it's going to do that, I'm just going to collect the rent every month, you're going to fairly quickly have to deal with this stuff. So let's get right into it. I've just come from a meeting with a fairly experienced real estate investor client of mine. And he has about 6 or 7 or 8 properties. Recently bought a home and he was having difficulty renting it. And so we put it on the market. It turns out it was overpriced. So he immediately reacted negatively. He didn't tell me about it, but he reacted negatively because it didn't rent in 3 or 4 days or 4 weeks in this case. So he decided to put it on the market. He's like, no, I'm going to sell it. Puts it on the market overpriced, doesn't get the reaction he wants from the market. And so he doesn't do any price changes, and he picks up the phone. Now, this is like 5 months later. Nobody's moved into his property. And we're having a conversation. It's like, there are 3 things about owning rentals that you need to know. That if your property is priced right, it's presented right, and it's in a good location, it will always rent. So which of these things are wrong? So I asked him, is your location right? It's like, absolutely, location's great. Is the condition right? Well, it's a brand new house. Okay, so we got check. Is it priced right? He told me what the rent was. I was like, it's priced wrong, drop your rent. So we agreed on a price to drop his rent. And guess what? After 6 months of messing around and being emotional about it, it rented in 4 days. And so he had a solution under his nose, but he didn't want to take that route. But the bottom line is that he was in turmoil about this. He has another bits and bobs of portfolio, so he can see things that are really working well. And so he's not green behind the ears here. This is a reasonably experienced guy, and yet he is dealing with a big psychological bullet. And the reason why it became such a big psychological bullet is because he's writing a check for a mortgage that's not being paid by tenants yet. And this started to bleed into into the conversations he's having with his wife. And with a real estate portfolio, quite oftentimes you've got yourself, but you've also got a spouse, and you need to bring that spouse along with you. And when you're going out and you're earning W-2 income every day, and you're taking $1,800 of that, and you're writing a check that's not covered by rent, you're going to get a cortisol reaction from your spouse eventually. It's like, what are we doing over there? And the worst thing that can happen is that you and or your spouse can turn off the whole concept of real estate investing at all. And so it is really, really important to understand, Clark, right out the bat, that happiness is when expectations meet reality, right? So if your expectations are that this is going to have, choppiness, and this is, not all going to go your own way, right? If you have expectations of that, and then you have the reality that kind of either matches it or exceeds it, you're going to be a happy real estate investor. I consider myself a happy, very happy real estate investor, and I think you would too. But it's not to say that we don't have daily phone calls with all sorts of crazy calling through, coming at us. So real estate has nothing but bullets coming at you and kicks in the stones from morning till night. Mark, let's just as an example, just to bounce the example around. Can you give us a few ideas of what those psychological bullets might look like to you? Give me a few examples of this.
So I started to think about it in the sense of like, what are things that could potentially happen that I know, okay? And then what are some potential surprises, right? And I really think that if we kind of put it into a bucket of like, I know that there's going to be things that are going to happen to this property. I know that the faucet looked older when I bought it and it could potentially break, right? I know that, like we were just talking before this, I've got a property I bought back in 2012 and it was on a septic tank, and the septic tank was old in 2012. Well, guess what? Let's get in this time machine and go to 2024 this year. It's still there and it's not any newer than it was in 2012. And I got a text from my property manager, and he's like, the septic tank has gone through its life, and I should be buying whoever made that septic tank a steak dinner because it lasted like 60 years, right? So, ultimately, I knew that, right? I knew going into buying that property, it was an old septic tank, and I was on borrowed time, and I should be thank my lucky stars it lasted 12 years, right? So there's things like taxes going up, right? Do you ever think your taxes are going to go down, David? Like this investment, am I worried, or do I think that taxes are going to go down? Do I think insurance is going to go down? And again, this doesn't have to be Florida, right? These are just things that I have a feeling that they're either going to stay the same, but if they go up, I'm not surprised one bit. So I kind of like already know that in the future, when I get my next tax bill, it is not going to go down, right? The city, the county, they like their tax revenue, and they like investment properties where they're not going to give you as many tax breaks like you would on a homestead exemption, right? So I already have, in my mindset, know these things, right? Talk to me a little bit about some of the things that might happen, but you don't really know when, right? Like, so if I have a roof on an inspection and the inspector says, hey, you've got 5 years worth of life left on this roof, right? Well, it's probably got about 5 years worth of life. So I kind of in my head know that in 5 years, I'm probably going to have to put a new roof on it, right? Well, today a new roof costs $8,000 on this 1,000 square foot house. In 5 years, it'll probably be 10, right? So it's like when I get this call from my property manager in 5 years, it says, hey, the roof's leaking, the insurance company won't cover me anymore. I've already know in my head that I've got a $10,000 expense in 5 years. Talk to me about some of the things, David, that maybe could happen, maybe things that you've experienced or stories you've heard. You just don't know when.
Well, to your point, they're the known knowns, and then we've got the known unknowns. So we don't know when we're going to have an eviction or if we're ever going to have one. But I do know that our brain is, it's the greatest worry machine in the universe, and that our brain is going to scan the planes, if you will, and give you a million what ifs. The reality is most of these things never happen, but they do happen, and you're not a victim, and the property manager is not to blame. Usually the tenant's not to blame, but life just happens. And so, the known the known unknowns here are going to be unknown repairs, just stuff that happens, like a pinhole leak behind a wall, just a plumbing leak. Nobody's to blame. It's just a big deal. You got to rip out the bathroom. It costs you $6,000, right? You're not, everyone will have a big emotional reaction to that, and it might end their real estate investing career, right? An eviction, they're incredibly rare with a good solid A or B class property, but they do happen. And resolving an eviction can feel you can feel victimized. You can feel like somebody's taking advantage of you, or just punching you in the face, and you're going to start blaming the court system and blaming politics and blaming this. Why do I have this eviction? I'm trying to get this person out. Market rents change. These are things that just happen that you don't know about, right? They're just, you weren't expecting them. That you knew they were outliers, but they just these things they're always going to happen, and so you haven't prepared yourself for them, and so you're unhappy because these situations are not meeting with your reality and your expectations of reality. And then you've got just Clark, you've got absolute outliers, unknown unknowns, like COVID. Who'd have thunk it, right? There's, and then government reaction to COVID. I remember the first couple of months of COVID. We were all on high alert. We had, between me and the affiliate groups that I was part of at the time, thousands and thousands of properties that we were expecting, 90% delinquency on our rents.
Right.
And we had 99% payment. You know what I mean? And then, we're expecting the market to fall apart. And little did we know that, the government were going to come in and do what they did, pump $7 trillion into the economy, and 6.9 trillion of that was going to end up in the real estate market. And so we have all of these things, and when they're good and they happen to us, we tend to celebrate those things. Oh, I bought this house for X and now it's Y, or we celebrate those highs. But then we really, really commiserate and overly empathize with ourselves and have cortisol reactions with things that go wrong. And so, Clark, why bother? Why would you take the money out of your bank account? It's sitting there, let's say $150,000 sitting there in your bank account, or in your 401k or wherever it is, and it makes you feel safe. Why would you possibly take that, put a good chunk of it into something that is just going to hurt you constantly? Big punch in the face as you try and buy it, a punch in the face when you're buying it on the closing statement, a punch in the face once every 2 to 3, 4 months, something happens, goes on. Why would people do this? So why wouldn't they just go home? Talk to me about that.
I want to give you a more elaborate answer. The short answer to that is it's going to change your damn life. It's to me, you asked that question personally. I'm able to do things I never would have thought I would have been able to do. I've being able to provide me confidence and security that I'm not going to miss next month's mortgage payment on my house that I live in. It's enabling me to step back and pivot and look at different business models and be able to take chances and risks and things that can help me compound. So I get to travel, I get to do things, I get to go to different countries, I get to do a lot of the things that I want to do because of all these quote unquote risks that we taking psychological bullets. That's the short answer, and it's pretty damn important. I think a lot of people that are listening to this and listen to other real estate podcasts, we get into real estate, we get into leveraging other people's money, banks' money, being able to buy these properties, have all the positives of it. But it's very easy to just focus on, well, what if this negative thing happens? What if the tenants stop paying? What if the roof goes bad? And what if it costs that? So it's kind of like, why do we want to go through all those things? And I think the interesting thing is that we just went through 3 categories of all right, what happens when the roof goes bad in 5 years, right? What happens when the tenant we have to evict? We don't know. The tenant doesn't sign a lease saying, hey, you're going to be evicting me in, 4.6 months, right? I've never seen a tenant fill out an application letting me know when I should be evicting them, right? So there's always that. And then obviously COVID is just on its own, right? So we have all these things, but the thinking about saying why you shouldn't do those is that all these are going to happen all at once, right? The roof's going to go out in year 1, the tenant's going to stop paying, and oh, by the way, COVID's going to happen and the government's going to tell the tenant that they don't have to pay and we can't evict them, right? So all these things are going to happen day 1, and why do it all, right? So we started thinking about this, and we were talking beforehand about what is a good relatable story or a movie that basically kind of makes fun of this premise, is that real life stuff doesn't all happen at once and go bad, right? David, what movie kind of embraces the hilariousness, the ridiculousness of this argument that you're going to buy a property, all the things are going to, repairs are going to happen, the property manager is not going to collect rent, the tenant is going to have to be evicted, they're going to punch holes in the ceiling, holes in the wall, and you're going to be left with this dump, right? What movie is this relatable to, so that our listeners can kind of understand how ridiculous of an argument that is in real life?
Well, I think you're alluding to the movie Office Space, if anyone's ever seen it. And in particular, there's a great scene when Michael Bolton and the rest of his colleagues take the printer out to a city park
Field.
and take baseball bats and take baseball bats to their printer. And the reason I think you bring that up is we're trying to create a dynamic here in your mind between what owning a real estate portfolio really is and the responsibilities that you have in it to your job. So if you go to paint this picture, we're thinking of Michael Bolton here on his way on a highway to work, and every time he's stuck in a 4-lane highway, and every time he changes lane, all the other 3 lanes, they move and his ones doesn't. So he moves into the other one and it stops and the other lanes start moving. And so he's having a bad day on his way to his commute, and then he goes in and he has to fill out those TCP reports, and then he's got the TPS reports, and then he's got the consultant in the office scanning around the office to see if there's if everybody actually has a role in the business. And so the reason we bring this up, obviously, is that when you go to your job every day, you get in your car every morning, you go to work, and the reality is loads of stuff is going wrong in your job. You wouldn't have a job if you went to work every day, and let's say if you were in pharmaceuticals and the cure for cancer was on your desk when you just got there, or you're in tech and you walk in, on a Monday morning and all the algorithms you have to write for the week are already written for you, right? Or if you're in logistics, and everything, you come in the morning and all the orders are just out the door. No, machines are breaking down. Let's say you go to work tomorrow morning and you spend 2 hours writing a really important report, and you think you've saved it, and you go to your lunch and you come back and you haven't saved it, and your computer has restarted and you've lost the document. That's happened to every single one of us. Super pissed off, right? Just frustrated beyond your wildest dreams. Well, in real estate, people take that emotion and they say, the hell with it. I'm done with this, right? And to give you a funny, illustration of what that would be in your job, right? That's it. I'm going to take my computer. I'm going to throw it out the window of where I work. I'm going to go into my boss. I'm going to tell my boss, I quit. And then you're going to get in your car. You're going to drive home and you're going to say to yourself, I quit my job today. And not only did I quit my job, but I'm never going to work again. That's it. I'm done with this working thing. Now, people do that with real estate all the time. They buy a property, or they buy 2 properties, and they lose, in the analogy, they lose their report, or the printer breaks down, or, you tell me what happens in work, or your boss gives out to you, or you have some kind of, sly political thing happening. But for some reason, we're way more resilient in our W-2 jobs. We go there and we build up resilience. We're like, I'm not just going to tell a guy I'm leaving. I'm not just going to, walk out the door. But people do this with real estate. And so why do people treat real estate as if somehow, some way, there should be some magical unicorn that just is hassle free? And then when they go to their work, they're willing to put up with so much politics and disruption, and all of their time is taken, and yet they're super resilient to something that, let's say, throws off $200,000 a year, $100,000 a year, whatever it is for you. So what are they missing? Clark, why do we invest? What would make us take on this extra thing, this extra hassle that takes our money, causes us stress in the now, and what feels like right now to be a big kick in the face? Oh no, it's always happened to Friday night. Clark, how many times have you been out Friday after a hard week of work? You crack open that first beer, and the phone rings, and that'll be Mr. Property Manager's got an urgent message for you. But it's never on a Monday. It's never during the day. It's always Friday night at 7:15. How many times have you had that call?
Yeah, I mean, too many times. And like you said, I can't remember the last time I got a call from a tenant and they were like, "Hey, Clark, I got your phone number from the property manager. I just wanted to call and let you know how much I love living here. And I want to pay you more money every month on a Friday at 5:30, right? I can't remember the last time a property manager called me and said, "Hey, Clark, just wanted to call you and let you know that the tenant moved out and the place is flawless. They did a professional cleaning. They painted. Actually, the wall paint looks better. You never get those calls. The only calls that you get are the cringeworthy. You're sitting at a happy hour on a Friday at 5:30 and you see your property manager like, "Oh shit, what's going on here?"
Property manager's never calling to tell you you've done really well. And it's funny. I was out with my wife the other day, and I was in like a news agent, right? Like just a regular store, and I swung the little machine with the prices on it, swung the machine around, said, "Oh, I was going to ask you a couple of questions." And I'm just like in there buying milk, and swung the machine around, and so like the option to give a tip. And I turned around to my wife, and it's like, I've been in real estate for 20 something years, and I've done, honestly, I think sometimes I've gone so far and above for clients, for tenants, like unbelievable exertion of time, effort, and money on my part. Do you know how many people have tipped me in my life ever?
Yeah, I would
I
say a
think
big.
somebody sent me some donuts before. I thought that was nice.
Yeah.
I'm being a little bit facetious. If you're listening, Donald, thank you very much for that wine.
So did you tip them
But
for the milk?
generally, no, nobody does that, Clark. And so I'm going to tell you why people do it, right? This is super, super important. We've been kind of leading up to this. I started out this conversation telling you about I met a couple just this morning who are reasonably experienced. And I explained to them, I was like, look, what you've just experienced, I don't want to sound cavalier. I really don't. And I don't want you to think I'm belittling, the stress that you've had, but it actually doesn't matter. By the time you put the missed payments or the not payments of rent in his case, by the time you put the income from the 6 properties, appreciation, depreciation, on your taxes, mortgage interest relief, your W-2 income, her W-2 income, all of your other state tax exemptions, your federal exemptions. By the time you put all of this into the pot, that's the pot that matters, not the particular property that's creating, like, that's a bunion on your toe, right? There's no doubt that particular one was a bunion, but overall, it represents almost nothing. So then I was like, I don't want to sound cavalier when I tell you, that this psychological bullet that you've just experienced is irrelevant. And she turned around to me, and she told me that her father, in the 1970s, bought an apartment building, like a small apartment building, right? And subsequently, he bought some dirt and he built another apartment building. So her father in the 1970s bought one and built one. So they have 2 apartment buildings. And he, unfortunately, is no longer with us. But the actions that he took in the mid-70s now fully fund his wife's life. She's a widow. It has also fully funded his offspring's first home, first deposits, college, all the college fees, college accommodation, weddings, all of life's expenses. And now the additional income not only funds the widow's life and everything in her world, not only has it helped her and her siblings and all their world, but now the apartment building that he built in the 70s is funding the grandchildren's life. And so
Wow.
we got to talking about the psychological bullets and how when they're happening to you in right now, when somebody calls you on a Friday night, tells you that the air conditioner broke down, there's no way to fix it, is a $4,600 fix. It's Friday night. Now you can take two approaches. You can be absolutely pissed off, ruin your night, put your drink down, and just have cortisol and hormone reaction and be angry as all hell about it and just ruin your weekend. Or you can just say, okay, all right, yeah, tell them to go ahead, put the phone down and go back to your drink. Now, I know which of those reactions I would prefer. Now, there's a strategy, making sure you take some extra income all the time and have an account on the side. Make sure that you have a real estate account so that that money is not coming out of your pocket. It's coming out of your business. Your business is a real estate business. So it's very important we have that. But I want you to think about that lady. So I'm sitting in front of her, telling her that she's dealing with her husband about big psychological bullets, big punches in the face that feel like they're big punches in the face. And then she told me about her father. And I was trying to describe that their punches in the face now feel like punches in the face, but actually what they are paper cuts. And so when her dad, if he were still alive and he were to look back at the challenges he faced in 1972, 3, 4, because that was a high inflation period. I guarantee you he had lots of tenants, didn't pay him rent. I guarantee you he had lots of overruns when he was building that second apartment. I guarantee you he's had numerous psychological bullets. But he has changed, his actions has changed 3 generations that I know of, and possibly more, with just this one thing. So why do we get into real estate, Clark? We get into real estate. It's not all about today. It's not for, in many cases, a lot of what you're doing is not even for you, right? Real estate is intergenerational, right? And you and I are the counter argument, because he was telling me this morning, Clark, that there's nobody he can talk to. He can't, like, I was like, who, it's like I've nobody I can talk to about. I feel lonely. Tell me about your thoughts about, when he gets with me and we have this conversation and she tells me about her dad. I'm like, look, I'm the counter. Your dad is the counter argument in that he walked the walk. He did it. And, had he been cautious, had he been conservative, had he not had the right psychological response to all the challenges he met, his widow would be in a different position right now.
Yeah.
They might have been, they would undoubtedly be in a considerably different financial condition. So, if you're out there and you feel alone, because you're not going to get validation from somebody who doesn't own a real estate portfolio or doesn't invest at all. Am I right, Clark?
Yeah, of course. I like that what you said, that, and it's important for you to understand listening, is that, the gentleman that bought the property in the 70s, it's not like he bought them with the intentions to help fund his great grandkids, right? Like, he probably didn't even think about maybe even his kids per se. You don't know. And I think it's important to understand is that you don't have to have this like 30-year roadmap, right? But for him to be able to, what he was doing, and he didn't even realize it at the time, is that he's creating generational wealth, and he's helping his kids and his kids' kids and his kids' kids' kids. But that's not how he started, but he started, right? And what he did do is he went through those psychological bullets, And he could have done exactly what your person that you spoke with earlier, where it's like, you know what, I'm pulling the ripcord. Let's throw it on the market. Let's just sell it. What if he would have taken the chips off the table, David, in 1985, right? He had them, built them in the 70s, and probably would make a nice little profit in 1985. How much of a change in the trajectory of his future generations in his family would have changed if he would have built it, had some nice rental income, and said, you know what? I'd like a nice boat. I'd like a newer car. I'd like a nicer, whatever, to be able to do that. And he didn't, right? And he thwarted off the psychological bullets of dealing with a problem tenant, dealing with that call at 6:30 at night on a Friday, interrupting his happy hour, right? And by him being able to kind of take these challenges and saying, you know what? Is it really that big? Is this a punch in the face, or is it more of a paper cut, right? And I think that part of it too is just the experience of getting the punches in the faces, and then realizing that, you know what, that hurt, but it didn't quite hurt as bad, right? Like it sucked. It was a crappy experience. My happy hour got interrupted, but ultimately I was able to wake up the next day and be fine. And you kind of get numb to it, and it becomes less emotional. And I think that's important, because a lot of times when I talk to investors where they're very emotionally attached to the property, they have given this property over to someone and let them live in their house, right? Where you literally physically have to ask for permission 24 hours to knock on the door and say, can I enter my own house, right? And then let's say the tenants, you have a bad experience, whatever that looks like. And you're like, how could they do that to my house? How could they ruin that beautiful granite countertop, and how could they not take care of it like I would take care of it? And you take offense to it, right? And when you have those emotional reactions to it, and just imagine if that gentleman would have had these emotional reactions to those units, how differently of a discussion you would have had this morning with the kids of that gentleman. And that I don't know about you, David, but that is a powerful thing to think about, how much the butterfly effect, right? The change of that one
Yeah.
delaying gratification, thwarting off the psychological bullets, taking it and saying, I know this is going to hurt for a little bit, but in the big picture, right, it's going to make so much more sense. And then I'm going to look back, because I know now, as we're doing right now, and we can tell stories, we can look back and laugh, right? I can laugh about stories where I had to peel off and write a $5,000 check or $10,000. It's like, you can laugh at it, but you have to go through it. And when I was writing that check for $5,000 in 2016, it wasn't really that funny. It really wasn't that funny, right? But it's like, if you can set your mindset to know that there are going to be psychological bullets coming at you. Some you should already be preparing yourself for. Some you should be preparing yourself for, you just don't know when, okay? And then some that's just shit happens in life. COVID happens, right? No one, as you said, we were all freaking out in what was it, March of 2020. I was watching my rental spreadsheet like a freaking hawk. I was like, what's coming in? Is 123 Main Street, Unit A. Okay, did they pay? Are they late? What can we do, right? And so, but now looking back, everyone paid. I had very few delinquencies. They were nice about it. If they paid late, we worked with them. It wasn't that big of a deal. And look where we're standing right now. So that to me is something that you have to be able to have the right mindset and understand the situation you're in, and knowing that, that roof went bad. Oh, well, I remember 5 years ago when I bought it, the inspection said that it had 5 years left. So,
Yeah.
and I built up enough cash flow, right, to where I can at least not pull out of my own pocket. Right now, maybe I'm not funding my Bahamas trip next month, but I'm now getting a brand new roof that my tenants help me pay for.
Yeah, it's very important what you just said. So let's talk about some actionable tips to surviving the psychological bullets. All right, because number one, understand the destination. In this scenario, think about the gentleman who bought in the 1970s and now has changed. He was the change. He has changed the trajectory of 3 generations. That's the outcome, right? That's the goal. Okay. The goal is that you're going to change your own life and your own retirement. but you're going to actually change a lot more than that. So that's the goal. It's a very benevolent goal. You very rarely, like, don't get me wrong, there's some people who, work for companies and get stock options, and those stock options go parabolic, right? So that, like, they're the outliers. Let's just say we're talking about the average man here, okay? It's very rare by you going to work every day that you change more than your experience of life, right? And maybe your spouse, but very rare you change the next generation in any kind of really meaningful way, and certainly the generation after, through you going to a job every day.
Right.
And so it's number one, understand the destination. Number two, understand that the power of leverage, in that when I go to work every day, there's just me. But when I own a rental, somebody gives me 40% of their income. When I own 2 rentals, I have 2 people give me 40% of their income. When I own 20 rentals, I have 20 people giving me 40% of their income. Understand how big and compounding that is. That's number 2. So get your destination, understand leverage. Number 3, have the discipline to understand that this is a business. If you go into your job tomorrow morning and something doesn't go your way, you're not going to throw the printer out the window and take a baseball bat to it and leave your job and never work again. That's an immature approach. And yet I hear it all the time. We bought this, tenant did that, we're never investing in real estate again. That's a similar reaction. So don't do that. It like the business that it is. Set up a business account. Put your down payment on your property, but no, that's not the last dollar you'll ever have to pay on it, right? You're investing all the time. You don't put a lump sum into the VOO, the S&P, and say, there it is. I'm going to put that lump sum in. I'm never, ever going to invest in the stock market ever again. I'm never going to put additional cash in. Very few people do that. They use, S&P ETFs as a bank account. They put the money in all the time and invest. And real estate is no different. So treat it like a business. Silo it. Have a separate real estate bank account, not attached to your personal bank account. That's a big one. So that when all of the real estate income comes in, it gets into a bank account. You're very unemotionally attached to that capital, because it's just your real estate income coming in, and then you have insurance and taxes and this and that and blah, blah, blah coming out of it. And then your personal, you can take, let's say, $500 out of that a month and put it in your personal, and then you could, blow that on candy if you want. But your personal money is very personal to you. If you're out working and you get a paycheck, and your spouse gets a paycheck, you've worked hard personally for that money. And so if I come in and I just grab $5,000 out of your personal account, you're going to have a reaction to it.
Right.
You're going to have a pissed off reaction to it, quite frankly. The bottom line is, when it's inside your real estate, it's just a business expense. So somebody calls me, to go back to our example, somebody calls me on a Friday night and they say, hey, David, I'm here. You got a 4-ton air conditioner that's just on its last legs. We're not going to be able to revive it. And it's going to be $6,800. I'm like, okay, just do it. Get it done. Send me the invoice, because it's coming out of my business account. So I'm kind of emotionally disconnected to it, because I understand it's a cost of doing business. And it's not like, oh, that money, it's not like I went to Vegas and lost it on the craps table, right? I have a new air conditioner in this property now. And for the next 20 years, I'm not going to have to replace that. So it's an investment in the future. So understand your destination, understand why you're doing it, understand that it is a business, and in business, things happen, right? In your business, in your job, things happen. Silo the capital so you're not emotionally connected to the capital. And from there on in, just manage the process. And that is essentially how to deal with the psychological bullets of growing and owning real estate. Clark, I have a question before we leave. Every one of us have regrets. And I have a minefield of regrets of things that got in my way. the psychological bullets that I negatively reacted to that changed my life. Because remember, saying no, not doing anything is way more easy. It's way more comfortable. Oh, I dodged that bullet. I was going to do that deal, but I found something in the home inspection, and I'm glad I didn't do that. Or the interest rates are high, prices are high. Oh, I'm just going to do nothing, right? Well, if you do nothing, your return is nothing, and you can't eat nothing, right? You might say, okay, well, if you have a viable, leveraged alternative to what you want to do with the capital, that's fine. We're all about buying businesses or invest in other things. But what we like about real estate is it's pretty predictable. It is leveraged, but our emotions get in the way. And so when I look back at my own real estate career, I'm not singing from the mountaintop
Right.
here about my successes or beating my chest. Quite the opposite. I'm sitting here saying, "Oh my God, you wouldn't believe the mistakes I've made. You wouldn't believe the emotional responses I've had that have prevented me from doing deals." I'll give you an example, and you give me a few. I recall seeing a duplex property in Clearwater, Florida, about 8 years ago, and it was for sale for $380. And I did my month one pro forma, and I wanted it for $330. And I was like, okay, well, yeah, I'll offer you $330. And he came down from $380 $370. And I said, okay, that's it. I'm going to play this cat and mouse game with you. So I went for like from $340 to $350, 20 grand apart. And I went back to him, and he's just like, final word, and I got it 360, right? So I'm at 340. I got it to 350, right? So I counter him at 350. And we're 10 grand apart. Now I want him to split that last 10 grand. I want him to come to me 5 grand. And I want to go up to him 5 grand. So I want to land at 355. Guess what? He tells me, F off. And my ego gets totally in the way. I'm like, well, if that's the way you want to play it, I'm not going to buy it. Over 5,000, like basically $10,000, which I would have had a mortgage on. It's like an extra
Right.
$28 or whatever it was in monthly rental payments. That property now is probably worth about $1.2 million. And
Yeah.
I don't own it.
Right.
That's the
That
important
hurts.
part.
Yeah.
I don't own that property. And I've had hundreds of conversations with people who will get a home inspection, and they will have just the 25 items of emotional response. I want this repaired. I want that repaired. And if sellers is like, I'm not doing that. Not
Yeah.
because the seller, is mean, or not because the seller is trying to get one over on you. The seller just doesn't have a handyman. And the seller's just like, how am I going to, I just don't want to do all that stuff. And a seller tells you to F off, right? And you're like, well, if you're going to tell me to F off, I'm not buying a property. So F you.
Right.
And now we have two emotional people, and you don't buy the property. You feel better because you quote unquote dodged the bullet of
Yeah.
$2,000 of minor repairs, a doorknob here and a loose garage door, or a double tap on an electrical panel. So you feel better. You're like, well, if that was, what was in a home inspection, surely there was more. I feel
Right.
better about myself. That's right. In that moment, when you feel better about yourself. But trust me, 20 years later, when you don't own that property and you've done nothing else, and all you've ever done is feel great because you did nothing, when you get older and when you start looking backwards, you're going to regret that emotional or egotistical response. And Clark, I say all this because you had a really illuminating conversation with a friend of yours. I don't want to name check anybody, but somebody that you used to do business with. Can you tell me that story? Somebody, very kindly gave you a call, was listening to this podcast, a very good podcast, really enjoyed it. Can you walk me through the feedback he gave, and just lay real quick the story as to, what you were doing, and make it fairly quick because we're trying to end this podcast.
So I had a buddy of mine that I used to kind of loosely work with probably 7 or 8 years ago. He texted me and he said, hey, I like the episode. He used to actually be full-time real estate investor. but I'm going to use that term loosely because, again, investing in real estate, in my opinion, if it's an actual investment, it's working behind the scenes, right? So if you're actively working on it, like fixing and flipping or wholesaling, or even like being a realtor, right, where you're just exchanging something in under a year, you're not really real estate investing. You have a real estate job, okay?
That's it.
And
Yeah,
that's
you
what
just got a job. Yeah, you're not
that's
investing
it.
unless you hold it. You own nothing.
Yeah. So if it's not working while you sleep, it's really not that much of an investment. And so he said, "Hey, look, I really like what I'm hearing. I wish that I could kind of get into a time machine and go back to those years. It was like 2014, 2015." And he said, I would do things much differently now. He's like, I would look at things on a different scale. I would hold a lot more as opposed to trying to continuously taking the chips off the table through reselling a property instead of keeping it himself, right? And it was interesting because I think his story is very common, is that when you ask a real estate investor, David, what's your biggest regret? The same answer 11 times out of 10 is I should have kept more. Okay. And what the interesting thing is that as we go through life, right, when you're in your 20s, you have a certain set of expectations that society kind of puts on you. In your 30s, typically you're probably potentially married by then. You might have a first kid or a second kid, and you live in you typically your expenses are higher when you're 35 than when you're 25, right? So you have more pressure on you. It's harder to do things, right? Like you're not going to have two roommates living with you when you're 38 years old with two kids and then have two random buddies in the other two bedrooms in your house, right? You're just probably not going to do that, right? You're probably not going to just pick your house up and go move to the next house very quickly because it's a big deal to you got all the kids stuff and all their toys and
Right.
everything, and then all the nicer furniture you bought. And now you bought a bigger house, so you have 4 bedrooms now worth of stuff instead of 2, right? So it was interesting to see his perspective because it's like when he was more agile, when he was more flexible, this is 8, 9 years ago, it would have been easier for him to kind of delay gratification, not take chips off the table. And now he's probably similar age to me. I'm 40. It's not over. He's still got plenty of time. But as we kind of alluded to earlier in one of the first episodes, is that his shot clock, right? If you've got a 24-second shot clock, when in 2015, he probably had 22 seconds left on that 24-second shot clock in his head, right? Now there's probably like 15 or 14 seconds left on that shot clock. And it's like, I know that I work hard and I make good money for that. But if I don't work hard, then I'm not really compensated and there's nothing working behind the scenes, right? So it was a bit powerful because even he was in real estate investing. He was in the trenches. He was planting seeds every day and digging ditches. And it still wasn't something that was like, you know what? Maybe I need to think a little bit longer in this and not look so short term and so near term. So it really stuck out at me. And I think that his story is similar to probably a lot of people where their shot clock is starting to tick. They're in a job where maybe they don't love every single piece of it. Maybe we need to start thinking bigger, start investing more wisely, maybe try to divert some of those things away from things that we would like, but we don't necessarily have to have. So I don't know if that story is like everyone's story, but I think that it's going to be similar. And whether you're 45 listening to this, you're 55 or you're 35, if you're not 23 anymore, the clock starts to tick. Your bills start to add up. Society starts to expect more from you. Society says that a 35-year-old should have a nicer house than a 25-year-old, right? You should have a nicer car at 35 than 25. You don't have to, but we all are here and society puts kind of some norms on us. So I just wanted to share that story because it left a big impression on me, is that it's never too late to start, but the best time to start is yesterday and the next best time to start is today.
So while he made money in his job in real estate, he's looking back now with hindsight, and like to your point, he's used up quite a lot of his investable window, the time in which he can operate. The time in which he can. Because it's debt by time by scale. It takes time. Real estate works over time. It's not rewarding day one. It never is. I've often said the day you buy a property, you feel like a fool. 20 years later, you feel like a genius. So if you go into a cocktail party and you say, I bought this rundown sixplex yesterday. Why would you possibly do that? Why would you $575,000 down, do a big renovation, $300,000 renovation, hold it for a year while you're doing that, not making any money, and then it's worth 1.3, might be worth 1.4. The bank will give you 850. That's how much you're in it for. So the bank will only give you back what you bought it for in your renovations. You're not giving you back any profit. Why would you do that? And then the cost of the debt is going to use up all of your free cash flow. So at the end of all of the year and a half, you're going to make $400 a month or $1,000 a month, whatever. Why would you possibly do that? It's so much easier to just not do that. Because in 5 years' time and 10 years' time, when that's worth $2 million and your debt is $700,000, you've got $1.3 million of equity. And we're not always going to be in high interest rate environment, and we're not always going to be in a very cautionary lending environment. And so maybe in 8 years or 9 years, when that property is worth 1.8 million and his mortgage is 600,000 and he wants to tap some of that equity, he's going to be able to just go take out $400,000 because the rents will have risen. He's going to take $400,000 for free whenever he needs it. He won't pay tax on it, and he can literally go buy a boat. Because the building is now working for him. And so it is so easy to stay on your lazy boy right now, watching Netflix, eating popcorn, drinking G&Ts. That's a burn your boats moment. Real estate investing allows you over time to burn your W-2 income away. It allows you to travel and burn all of your ties to, you don't have to burn them all down, but you get my point. Gives you that freedom to walk away. But real estate allows you to quote unquote burn your boats. But there is a cost to it. There are psychological bullets to it. There is a lot of emotional response to it. But what you do not get is a free lunch. And so with that, we conclude today's episode. I hope this was super valuable, because real estate investing, you need to have resilience. Going to a job every day, quite frankly, you need to have resilience. So we've gone through some real good tips for creating that resilience and that endurance. And with that being said, we ask that you subscribe to this podcast. Really appreciate if you go on and rate us and give us some stars. I really appreciate if you would email us on contact@burnyourboatswealth.com. That'd be awesome if you could email us and tell us what you think of the show or things that you think we should cover. Negative feedback, that's cool. We're very happy to improve. And with that being said, Clark, do you have anything as we close out this episode?
Yeah, we're trying to grow this podcast. We appreciate the support. We've had a lot of people reach out, and they reach out with like really good things. It was like the story that I just shared about my buddy that wanted to go back and if he could kind of hit the reset clock, right? It helps us to grow the topics because ultimately Dave and I have to sit here and figure out, okay, what are topics we think people want to hear about that are important to help you really change your mindset, grow your wealth, burn your boats, right? So if you have things that you want us to talk about, we'd love to hear it. Also, too, if you think that things that we are saying don't add up to you, or you question it, or you think that you have a better idea, I'd love to hear that because I love debating everything. So I'd love to hear your counter thesis to our thing about saying, hey, this is what we felt like on this episode. So please, please, please be open. We have thick skin. I've been told no a million times as I've been in sales all my life. So I have a very thick skin. And so be open. We appreciate the support. Hit the subscribe button. Go to Instagram, Facebook. Hit us with feedback. And with that, we'll sign off and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much, guys.
You've been listening to the Burn Your Boats podcast with Clark Lunt and David Shaw. We would love to hear from you. Please reach out at burnyourboatswealth.com with comments, questions, and if you have a topic you would like Clark and David to discuss on an upcoming episode. We would very much appreciate it if you took the time to rate and review Burn Your Boats podcast on your favorite podcast listening app, and make sure to follow and share on social media. Content in Burn Your Boats podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not legal or financial advice. Please review our legal disclaimer at burnyourboatswealth.com. Thank you for listening.